Welcome back to Annie Breaks It Down, where we ask the one question that no one seems to be able to answer. What on earth is happening? Think about the United States, not as a map of red and blue, but as a patchwork of places. Dense global cities, mid-sized manufacturing towns, and low-density rural counties. Federal policy doesn't move evenly across that patchwork. When jobs are cut, subsidies trimmed, or tariffs slapped on imports, the effects aren't evenly spread across the country. They hit hardest where federal payrolls, farms, and safety net checks matter the most. And it turns out a lot of those places voted Republican. That creates a weird political paradox. The policies pitched as shrinking government often end up hurting people who voted for them the most. In this video, we're going to lay that case out in a careful, evidence-based way. We'll move past broad red versus blue claims and dig into the local numbers, trace the channels from policy to real economic outcomes, address the main counterarguments, and even suggest ways to soften the blow. Let's talk about what the numbers show. In 2025, the top 10 states that received the most SNAP benefits are California, New York, Illinois, Texas, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, and Georgia. Of those, the 3 Democratic-leaning states, California, New York, and Illinois, combined have 10.1 million SNAP recipients. The other 7 Republican-leaning states combined have 22.3 million SNAP recipients. This year, roughly 52,000 federal jobs were cut from the 7 Republican-leaning states, compared to about 41,000 jobs cut in 3 Democratic-leaning states. Farm subsidy reductions hit Republican SNAP states by about $5.2 billion versus $3.6 billion in the Democratic states. On the fiscal side, California, New York, and Illinois were net contributors in 2024, paying about $522 billion more to the federal government than they received, while the 7 Republican states collectively were net contributors by about $217.8 billion. These aren't moral judgments, they're a map of exposure, where federal dollars flowed, where they were cut, and who felt it most. Red versus blue isn't the whole story. Saying that red states rely on federal aid flattens the picture. The more precise point is that many rural counties and smaller metro areas that voted Republican have higher shares of employment tied to federal jobs, get more SNAP benefits per person, and depend more on farm and manufacturing income than urban blue counties. So the question is, why does looking at counties or commuting zones even matter? Well, big blue states have wealthy cities but also poor rural areas, and those areas respond differently to federal policy. Red states also have wealthy metros, think Austin or Miami, that behave more like blue state metros when it comes to employment and taxes. Place-based analysis lets you see where exposure is really highest, not just red versus blue, and shows why some areas feel the effects more sharply. To put it simply, the question isn't do red states depend on federal dollars? The question is which places depend on federal dollars, and many of them voted Republican. Now let's talk about how the cuts actually affect local economies. There are 4 main ways cuts and trade shocks hit local communities. The first is direct income loss. When federal jobs disappear, local payrolls shrink and households lose income. That also reduces local tax revenue for schools, roads, and other services. The second way is local multiplier effects. Federal wages circulate. Workers spend at grocery stores, on rent, and at local businesses. Lose those wages, and you also lose secondary jobs and sales tax revenue. Third, industry shock and trade exposure. Tariffs and retaliatory trade measures reduce demand for exported crops and manufactured goods, lowering prices and local employment in export-heavy counties. And lastly, labor supply disruptions. Immigration enforcement and deportation shrink the pool of low-wage labor for farms, processing plants, and construction, causing shortages and losses in agricultural counties. These effects aren't theoretical. Payroll reductions show up in employment reports, export declines happen after tariffs, and harvest losses follow seasonal cycles. Where federal jobs, high SNAP dependency, and export-exposed industries overlap, vulnerability spikes. Now I want to address the main counterarguments. The first is cuts make government more efficient. True, some federal spending is duplicative. Efficiency can boost long-term growth. But abrupt cuts hit local economies hard. Efficiency gains are only meaningful if paired with transitional support. Otherwise, short-term pain can outweigh long-term benefits. Now we could say tariffs protect domestic producers. Tariffs can help certain industries, sure, but protection for some triggers retaliation elsewhere. Export-heavy agriculture and manufacturing counties saw big negative impacts, while service-heavy metros remained insulated. Our last counterargument: net contributors shouldn't subsidize others. It's fair to question redistribution, but federal transfers are designed to smooth shocks, fund national priorities, and maintain a single market. The solution isn't sudden cuts. It's transparent reform and deliberate policy choices. Here are some practical ways to soften the blow. If cuts are unavoidable, there are ways to reduce the damage. We could phase in reforms by gradually reducing or restructuring programs over several years so communities can adjust. We could try targeted support, occupational retraining, wage insurance, or local infrastructure investment for counties losing federal income. We could implement trade mitigation funds. We could help producers hit by retaliation shift to new markets or inputs temporarily. We could use transparent accounting. Public reporting at the county level shows who pays, who receives, and makes redistribution explicit. And finally, we could use place-aware policy. We could avoid blanket rules, design program eligibility, and phase-outs with geographic differences in mind. These steps won't prevent all-out pain, but they make reforms more politically sustainable and reduce concentrated economic harm. This is about places, not colors. The striking fact isn't just that some Republican voting areas get federal aid. It's that policies framed as ideological wins can have highly localized consequences. And those consequences often fall hardest on the very communities that helped elect the policymakers who created them. Political debates often frame this as smaller versus bigger government, but that misses the bigger picture. Dollars move through geography. If you care about economic resilience and democratic legitimacy, policy has to recognize the places that those dollars sustain, and be honest about who will be affected and how they can adapt.